following program is suitable for all audiences.
Let's let this hard work pay off. Let's cut it loose, ball out, let's put a lot of freaking points up on the board. Let's go. Every day we improve, right? Yep. Reset, job not done. Yes, sir. Play by play, next play mentality. Love you, bro.
I want you to take a second to think about everything every one of you gave up to be in this position right here. I don't care what you did, you had to give something else to have this opportunity. So take advantage of it tonight. Play ball like you love it. Here we go.
Come on, boys. Let's beat up, man. Get it.
Like we talked about earlier this week, it's the opportunity for us to stack this game. Let's go ahead and execute. Let's be the playmakers out there. Let's go. Playmakers on 3. 1, 2, 3. Playmakers. Yeah.
I'm going to challenge you right now for greatness. Yes, sir. You got me? Yes, sir. You take this thing over right now. Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. Trubisky throwing left side of the end zone. Catch is made. Touchdown Bears.
Attaboy! Attaboy! Great job.
Snap. Trubisky throws the slant right. Robinson in the end zone. Touchdown. A well-executed drive puts the Bears in front.
Come on, boys. Good job. Zero. Go run, bro.
Bearlissimo.
Welcome to Bearlissimo. It is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020, and this is another brand new episode of Bearlissimo. We come to you every Tuesday live on our Mixlr.com channel. That's MIXLR.com. Those of you listening on podcasts and on YouTube, join us live. Come into the chat room, interact with fellow Bears fans, talk to us, ask questions, let us know what you're thinking about the Chicago Bears, their offseason plans, their draft needs. Whatever is on your mind, we will try to tackle it here on Bearlissimo and our other programs on the Bears Barroom Radio Network. My name is Aldo Gandia. Don't you worry. George Bayliss is here. He is, of course, Bearlissimo. George, how are you, brother?
I'm very well, Aldo. I'm glad that we're able to get started and obviously cover what we've seen at the Combine, which was incredibly late in the evening for me, I've got to say. It's the first time it's been on at prime time in the States, so that was a bit of a change for me as well, having to stay up a little bit later to have one of my fun times of the year where I get to watch guys run around in shorts. Not as not homoerotic or anything, but it's just one of those things where you're trying to see whether the athleticism that you saw on tape and whether what you think you see from players when they're actually playing with pads on, whether that translates to what they're actually doing on the field. Obviously in the best of possible conditions, in a dome with trainers on and none of the pads to run around in. All it basically does is confirms whether guys are working hard in the off season and also whether what you're seeing in terms of things like just out and out pace, change of direction, acceleration, and some of the drill work as well, sort of bend, dip, getting around the edge, those sorts of things with defensive players, whether what you've seen on tape is confirmed or not based upon what you see at the Combine. So it was really interesting again, obviously, to watch it with that hindsight in mind. I've got a big board now of 300 players that I have adjusted some people off the back of it, and I'm sure we'll get into that all day.
Absolutely. We've got a lot to get into in this hour of Bearlissimo. One of the things that I wanted to discuss with you, and we talked a little bit about it just a little while ago, was at the Combine, we learned certain things about players. For instance, Lance Zierlein was on the NFL Network. He does some great draft profiles at NFL.com. He's one of my favorites. He shared that Ezra Cleveland, the offensive tackle from Boise State, played in 2019 with a toe injury that limited his agility, and that toe injury now is fully healed, and it looked like it at the combine, that he was moving really well, much better than he did in some of the tape that he looked at from last year. And that's kind of the cool thing about the combine, is that some of these stories come forward and we learn about players and perhaps what hardships they went through, and so that kind of clouds a little bit the tape. We know that the tape never lies, but sometimes it can be a little misleading because we're not totally aware of what's going on with team dynamics, injuries, and so forth. So I know you took a look at Cleveland, and you've been high on him based on tape and based on what you saw at the combine.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that injury probably came after the first few games of the season, because he started out the season at Boise State playing at a high level. In fact, they used his athleticism well. Sometimes he was actually lining up as a tight end and carrying the ball, believe it or not, as an offensive tackle.
Cool.
So he's a guy I've been watching for quite a while at Boise State. Particularly good player, I feel. Could be a starting left tackle. His athleticism shows on tape, and that was confirmed with what we saw in the combine. Obviously, there's other guys that weren't at the combine that, through these interviews that we've been able to do all day, we've been able to find out some of this information that was limiting them. For example, Joey Magnifico that we had on last week confirmed he was dealing with a knee injury and wasn't able to practice during a week, and that obviously limited his senior year. Now, you don't see this in the evaluations of other draft scouts, but when you hear this information firsthand from a player, it helps you to evaluate maybe what you saw on tape with a bit more context. And I think that's the thing that very often in American football, we miss is context, because, whether we're looking at Mitch Trubisky or the offensive line or the play calling or, people performing at a combine or on, the tape that you see on Saturdays when you're watching college football, all of this information is quality, and it helps you to build a better picture and paint that picture as to what you're actually seeing, to be able to better evaluate and understand that. And one of the guys, you mentioned Ezra Cleveland, one of the other tackles that sort of his story really came to light was Austin Jackson, the offensive tackle, left tackle out of USC. And a lot of people sort of cite and knock him down on his tape against Iowa. Well, maybe one of the things that they didn't necessarily evaluate was the guy donated bone marrow for his sister, who has a rare blood disorder, and still requires treatment and help, and he's raising money for her. Part of the issue that he actually sort of talked about when he was at the combine in these interviews was he elucidated about the fact that he had to be away from his team for a month in sterile conditions to be able to donate the bone marrow without necessarily giving his sister an infection that could potentially threaten her life. Wow. So, a month away from facilities, a month away from playbook, a month away from, what's going on sort of day in, day out. And you think about what you might cover on an American football team within a day or within a week of practice. A month away from the facility is going to severely impact and hinder your ability to be able to play. And for him to take such a selfless act and still play at a very, very high level, for me, he's one of my favourite offensive tackles in this draft, was just superb stuff to hear. And you hear these stories and about where players have come from and the hardships they've gone through, and it really does give you that extra context. So, it's all quality stuff, and that's one of the things I think was cool this year with the order that it was in. Was you were able to hear a little bit more of these interviews, either from what you saw on Twitter with various different people there and interviewing people live at the podium and at the tables, or whether it was the coverage that you saw on the NFL Network. So one of the best in terms of coverage of those kind of stories that I've seen, and you're able to look at guys that you like, players you like, just look, search their name on Twitter, and you get these videos pop up. So it's worthwhile. Anyone that is sort of a bit of a fanalist out there, or is a wannabe scout or analyst like I am, go out there and search the names of players that you like, and you'll no doubt find some of these interviews, and you'll get some of this quality stuff about them. So I encourage everyone to go out there and find out as much as they can to make their opinions.
Yeah, and I encourage the NFL Network to do more of the stuff that they did, like Steve Mariucci doing the whiteboard with Jalen Hurts, a 15-minute video or so. And that was just a great insight into Jalen Hurts, his confidence, his knowledge at the whiteboard. Mariucci diagrams a play, and then a few minutes later, Hurts has to go through the same play and explain why Mariucci thinks it works and so forth. And it's just a great way to get to know these players and their personalities better. Because, frankly, watching these guys run these drills over the course of 5 days or so, whatever it was, it can get a little boring. We need to know the stories of these guys. We need to know what makes them tick. And so I'd love to see more of those features. That's, for me as a football fan, that's the most fascinating thing about the game of football is to learn about the challenges these guys have gone through and what makes them tick. And then you can make better evaluations of them and how they can potentially help your football team. You agree with that?
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that the Bears Bar Room has done so well, not only sort of this year but also in the past, is to get some of these stories straight from the players' mouths. And I have thoroughly Reggie Walker, Bryson Hopkins, and Joey Magnifico. Mm-hmm. I've thoroughly enjoyed those conversations with those young men, and they've impressed me no end. All three have been fantastic value in terms of, giving a little bit of information about themselves, taking criticism on the chin that they weren't necessarily prepared for. And you hear the honesty and the sort of that's the best policy after all. And you hear this as they're coming through and talking to people. And if anyone's listening to this, either live or on the podcast, so I encourage you to listen to the other shows where we're able to interview people, including Draft on Tap. I know my brothers over there are going to be interviewing the FIU QB this week, so tune in for that as well. So stay sticking with the Bears Bar Room, because we're going to bring you this, and it's going to be in a format that hopefully you enjoy and you engage with. And if you're in the chat room, you can sort of ask questions live when we've got guys on. And if you're not, listen to the content, make your own opinions, but do it with, like you said earlier, with that informed opinion. And that's what we try and bring here at Bears Bar Room. So, yeah, absolutely psyched for this draft mess, as I call it. It's like Christmas, but to do with the draft. And the content that we're able to bring to people, it's been fantastic so far. I'm looking forward to that to continue.
All right, let's talk about the NFL Combine through the eyes of George Bayliss, a.k.a. Bearlissimo. What I want to do, George, is talk about some of the performances at the Combine and how they may have impacted your big board, which people can find at thedraftnetwork.com. I will try to put up a link on Twitter and Facebook channels so that people can head over there and take a look at your big board, because it's fun to take a look at where you've placed players. But let's talk about performances, and I think a good place to start is at the tight end position. And Albert O is somebody who really performed well at the Combine. How did he impact your big board, if he did at all?
Okay, so what we saw from Albert O, 6'5", 258 pounds, running a 4.49. That's impressive in any context. But what it does tend to do is when you get something like that, I had already looked at his tape, and part of my process, just to let you in sort of behind the screen, part of my process is I will look at players and I will sort of look at their position, what I'm expecting to see from them, and I'll watch sort of 2 or 3 games, and very quickly in sort of 5, 6, 7 plays, because you're looking isolated players actually highlighted on the tape. When you're looking at it, you will kind of very quickly be able to see the kind of things that you want to see. It's one of the reasons that Cole Kmet had never really impressed me that much, was I kind of saw him rounding routes and not looking particularly athletic or bending or getting out of his breaks very quickly. I saw someone who was clearly an athlete. I saw someone who was clearly big and strong, but I wasn't particularly impressed with the route running side of his play. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he can't be a tight end in the National Football League. Quite clearly he's going to be. But with Albert O, what I saw was a lack of production last year and sort of shorter routes. And I think that was possibly because of the drop-off between Drew Lock being QB in the previous year and obviously the QB that they've got now. So I went and had a look. I mean, that's what the 4.49 did. It made me go and have another look at the tape from the previous year with Drew Lock at QB, and that's where I saw a really dynamic tight end, and he may well move further up, because I've only seen sort of a couple of games from the previous year with Drew Lock at QB. I'm going to look at more, and that possibly might move him further up my board. So that's kind of, I'm assuming that that's the sort of thing that some of these scouts at teams will do. I mean, obviously they will have seen more of a player live. They will have access to the All-22. it'll be their job to look at regions and position groups and things like that. They should have done the work by now. But certainly the draftniks that are out there, the finalists, the home evaluators, those sorts of things, that's what necessarily these combine performances will make you do. They will make you go and look at a greater sample size and maybe that you'd ruled people out. So that's what I'm going to do with Albert O. He's impressed me. He has already moved up in terms of banding. I previously ranked my tight ends and put them in bands. He's moved up banding. It's a case of when I've looked at more tape, I'll be able to have a better idea about where he sits in terms of order. Currently, I think he's 7, is he on my list?
7 on your list, 116 overall. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about who you have at number 9 from Vanderbilt, the tight end Jared Pinkney, who did not have a good combine. He ran a slow 40. I think it was a 5.04, if my memory serves me correctly. And he was not very impressive in the drills. How much did his performance at the combine affect your evaluation of him? And let me know if you think that, he is still a possibility for the Chicago Bears.
Realistically, now I think he's probably going to be moving down even further than he was. His athleticism didn't show massive athleticism. He's a big guy and he's a strong guy. But the worst drill at the combine was the sled drill. And I don't know if you managed to see that with the tight ends.
Missed it.
But he hardly got any movement on the sled drill at all. And that should be his forte. That's his game. He's an angry runner when he's got the ball in his hand. Reliable catcher from what I've seen on tape, but in the drills he struggled. Certainly in terms of his 40 time was not a great performance there. Vertical, not a great performance there. Not particularly outstanding in the bench press for a guy that needs to rely on strength over speed. So he really did underwhelm and has moved him. Unfortunately, his tape wasn't overwhelming, but it was decent. He doesn't necessarily get massive separation. What he does do is body people well, so he gets himself between the defender and the ball, and he's able to catch with a bit of strength through that contact. And if he gets the ball in space, then he's able to run over the little guys. So that's kind of what you're going to get from him. But whether he's now draftable for the Bears, I'm thinking not, with the number of picks that we have and the needs that we have to be able to fill. Some other team might take him potentially in one of the later rounds, but I think he's now firmly moved himself now into the later rounds in terms of where he sits. He's going to be no doubt dropping down further on the board as I watch more and more tape from these guys who are a little bit lower that perform better.
I understand that Josiah Guara was also another winner from the tight end position at the combine. Do you agree with that? I saw the video of him at the bench press. That was pretty remarkable. I think he had like 41 presses on the bench press. It was one of the higher marks ever for a tight end at the combine. Your thoughts on the tight end from Cincinnati?
Yeah, so on tape, he looks like an athletic guy, runs at 100 miles an hour. Not necessarily at the right place, but he's a guy who's an effort blocker. Runs really well, gets in and out of his breaks well. Previously, I hadn't sort of thought of him as being a strong guy. In terms of his blocking, that certainly doesn't pop off on tape. He had 25 reps, Aldo.
Oh, my bad.
The bench.
Yes.
No, that's okay. But I mean, the guy that was probably more impressive on the bench was Hunter Bryant, because he really is sort of a strengthened up wide receiver.
Yeah.
So he had 23 reps, and that was impressive. Mm-hmm. Pinkney had 23 reps as well. Bryson Hopkins did really well with 21 reps. But yeah, Josiah Guara, what I saw in sort of his ability to block, and I'm not sure again whether it's Cincinnati scheme, but he seems to be a move guy. So he's not an in-line necessarily. Sometimes when he's in line, he's over-trying, and so he loses balance and sort of pitches forward and he's off balance, and if he doesn't make great contact, he ends up on the floor. In space, he needs to be sort of slightly less excitable, break down, and use his size advantage over defensive backs. So there's definitely clay to work with. Athleticism, speed, in terms of his agility, his things like that. Obviously, he performed well there. But it's a case that you're going to have to work with him so a later round still a later round tight end for me because there are, like I say, there's quite a few holes that need to be plugged and changed. Stephen Sullivan as well, the LSU tight end, converted wide receiver. He had a really good combine, particularly as you'd expect with a converted receiver on the gauntlet drill and things like that. We're actually catching the ball and running routes. He was really outstanding for that from in terms of the performers at the combine. Obviously Bryson Hopkins, exactly as I'd expect him to do. Great route running. Cole Kmet, a little bit stiff in the hips, rounds off routes a little bit, but very quick in a straight line. Mm-hmm. Gets away from the line of scrimmage, with great explosion, which you'd kind of expect for the kind of numbers and the broad jump and things like that he put up at the size that he was. A good 40 time 4.7 at 262 and 6'6". Quite impressive. Not Albert O kind of figures, but still nonetheless impressive at his size. But his three cone, as he shows, this is what I'm saying with the change of direction. It shows up in things like three cone. It shows up in terms of like the drills of getting in and out of breaks and that kind of thing. And that's kind of what showed up on the tape for me, and it also showed up at the combine. But yeah, those guys performed very well. Josiah Guara out of Cincinnati is another guy I'm going to have to look more at the sort of the full game tape, so I can evaluate his blocking a little bit better to see whether he has the actual chops to be able to do it. If he does, he could move up a little bit further as well.
Let's turn our attention to the quarterback position. I mentioned Jalen Hurts in his interview with Steve Mariucci, how impressed I was with him. You took a look at his drills. What was your evaluation of Jalen Hurts? And do you think that the Bears should consider him as a second-round draft pick, a developmental type quarterback?
Second round, definitely not. Not for me. So the Mariucci stuff, I've no doubts that Jalen Hurts is a smart young man. He is able to look at a whiteboard and to be able to decipher what the coverage is and who he needs to go to. He's able, if he's got lots of space and sort of you move him out of the pocket, same as you would have to do with Mitch Trubisky behind a dysfunctional offensive line. If you move him out of the pocket, get him in space and doing half-field reads, he's able to do that. If you want to stand him inside of the pocket and get him to diagnose coverages from the pocket, he struggles. There's no getting around it. I mean, as much as he's clearly a leader of men, he's clearly athletic, he can clearly throw the ball when the conditions are right. The conditions aren't always going to be right, and he's going to take a lot of work, possibly, to be able to get that. He might not ever get the acuity to be able to look instantly and diagnose and go to the right place. If you scheme guys open, if you have half-field reads, and he's able to use a functional running game, he will be much more dangerous. So if you put him in somewhere like Baltimore, where they've got a running game and they've got some fast receivers, and they roll out, the quarterback out of the pocket, he could excel somewhere like that. If you put him somewhere where he's going to stand back in the pocket with a dysfunctional running game, as the Chicago Bears had last year, and we don't know what we're going to have this year, for me, he's a late round project quarterback, despite the pedigree, despite what he's done in terms of both at Alabama early on and last year at Oklahoma. Oklahoma QBs, the stats quite often are inflated, and because it's just such a good quarterback head coach to be able to get players playing to the maximum of their level. I just don't see him doing the processing in terms of looking at coverages, knowing instantly where to go. He knows it on the whiteboard, no doubt. No doubt he knows it on the whiteboard. There's a difference between knowing it on the whiteboard, doing it on the field, and that's what I didn't see at the Senior Bowl particularly. Now, when he's with a team and he's spent more time with them and he knows everyone inside out and he knows the scheme inside out, he's going to be able to do it. But that's not what the Chicago Bears currently have.
Just as a counterpoint to your argument, Adam Hogue and his latest mock draft that you can find at WGNradio.com, he talks about his skepticism that the Bears are going to find a veteran quarterback in free agency that's any better than Mitchell Trubisky, and so he thinks that the Bears should take a crack at a developmental quarterback, and he believes that with the 50th overall pick, Jalen Hurts would make for a good choice. I'll read a little bit from his his 3 paragraphs here. I'll read the final paragraph. If you want to take a true swing at a potential star quarterback with a second-round pick, you have to draft Jalen Hurts here. It might be risky, but every time I type out the word risky, I am reminded that we're talking about one of the most decorated college quarterbacks in this century. Hurts lifted up 2 blue blood programs, Alabama and Oklahoma. He's nothing but a winner with a high character background, competitive work ethic, and outstanding football IQ. In some ways, this feels like a do-over on passing on Deshaun Watson. So if Adam Hogue is listening to your podcast, George, let him know why you disagree.
Adam Hogue, I'm talking to you directly now, mate. I know we've spoken in London. We've both had a beer together. I'm afraid comparing him to Deshaun Watson is like comparing Mitch Trubisky to Drew Brees. That's the best analogy I can give you for it. My quarterback rankings, I've got Joe Burrow number 1, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, who elevated himself at the Combine, did particularly well. Jordan Love as being a possible first-round quarterback. Some team is going to fall in love with Jacob Eason and his arm. For me, he stares down far too much wide receivers. Jake Fromm underwhelmed with his athleticism, but all he ever does at Georgia, or certainly for the first 3 years of his career at Georgia, is hit open wide receivers and throw people open and anticipate coverages. He reads coverages really well and goes to where he needs to go to. Likewise, Anthony Gordon, but a smaller sample size. He's my next QB. And then at 131 overall, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th on my list is Jalen Hurts, just above Cole McDonald. So I think some team probably may draft him in the second round. I would be amazed whether Ryan Pace would actually take a swing on a kid that would be equally as much of a gamble as Mitch Trubisky, and possibly the same sort of athleticism, but not as big as Mitch Trubisky. And obviously you're sort of 2 years, 3 years invested in Trubisky. Whether you would want to have someone to compete with him who still needs as much work, if not more, I think that would be a leap too far, certainly in the second round. If he's there in the 4th round at the comp pick, take him, because I think the value would outweigh the risk there. In the 4th round, you could potentially get a long-time starter in the NFL. No doubts that he might be able to do it. I don't see it on the tape, and I don't see it in my evaluation of what he's done at quarterback. Yes, he played at Alabama, but the receiver talent, the running back talent, the offensive line talent he had there was way better than anything he played against. And the same with Oklahoma. Most weeks, he just had talent around him that was just so much better than the opposition team, that it was easy for him to stand out rather than someone like Anthony Gordon, who had lesser talent to work with at Washington State, but still put up absolutely fantastic numbers and shows the ability to be able to read and diagnose and get the ball out away from his arm really, really quickly. So I would rather take Anthony Gordon, Jacob Fromm, both of those guys over Jalen Hurts. Jacob Eason, for me, I've got him rated higher than Fromm and Gordon, but that's because I think a team is going to fall in love with his arm and his arm talent. So that's what I've got for you.
Well, and give me your evaluation on Jordan Love, because he really helped himself out at the Combine, or at least even before any of the drills. There was scuttlebutt about Jordan Love, and that NFL general managers and scouts were in love with him. And in fact, one of the commentators on the NFL Network said that he was the second best quarterback after Joe Burrow in this draft. What are your feelings about Jordan Love? Does he deserve all this love, pun intended?
Yeah, well, he's definitely got all of the attributes and talent, size, athleticism, the arm strength, the ability to drive the ball, quick release, athleticism, in abundance. He's got everything that you want in terms of those sort of things. Obviously, a dip in production in his final year in college, but he's also had a number of offensive coordinators at his university, Utah State, as well, and they're not necessarily a massive program. They're a program which is on the up. But they are nonetheless, attracting lesser talent in terms of being able to pull in recruits. They're pulling from a smaller talent pool and, competing against teams like Oregon, USC, people like that. So it's much more difficult for them to get talent around him. What I think people And again, we're not privy to this because we've not yet been able to interview him. But if you're able to sort of sit down with him and look at game tape and say, what are you seeing? What are you seeing where you're looking at coverages? He might well be able to show those sort of things. And I think that's possibly why he's risen at the combine over what he's done necessarily on the season, and obviously in his production in college and at the Senior Bowl. At the Senior Bowl, obviously everyone's new, different level of talent to what he's used to. No doubt there was teething troubles, and the offensive line he was playing behind at the Senior Bowl were woeful. So no doubt that hurt his stock unnecessarily so, because like I say, he's definitely got all the talent. All of the tools are in the box, and certainly in his previous year's production, he put it on the field as well. There was a dip in for last year, but like I say, there was also a scheme change. So clearly, I think the interviews and the way that he's been able to conduct himself in those interviews and meetings, that's what I think has possibly elevated him at the combine.
Let me do a little detour here for just a couple of minutes because I'm dying to get your opinion on Nate Sudfeld, who has now become a topic of discussion for the Chicago Bears. This was first reported by NJ.com about a month ago that he could be a possibility for the Bears because of his familiarity, or I should say John DeFilippo, the new quarterbacks coach for the Chicago Bears, because of their work together. Sudfeld has spoke highly about how DeFilippo prepares quarterbacks. What are your thoughts about this 6'6", 227-pound quarterback who I believe he's never started a regular season game, and is 20 for 25 for 156 yards with a 106 quarterback rating in his very limited play as a pro? What are your thoughts on Nate Sudfeld?
So I can see why people are linking him. Obviously, the DeFilippo, the Eagles offense, that sort of scheme, similarity between what we're doing, what they've done, what Andy Reid's done. DeFilippo being now the QB coach, familiarity in terms of scheme and things like that with Coach Nagy. Obviously, we've got a former offensive line coach for the Eagles as well. All of those sort of tick boxes and those sort of tenuous links, they're all there. Sudfeld is a decent QB, has lots of tools. Like you say, there's not a lot of starting tape in the NFL to evaluate him on, but when he was called to come in and play, he did pretty well. He did okay. I don't know if you remember, Aldo, but in episode 1 of Bearlissimo, our very first episode where we were looking at free agency, I kind of pointed at younger guys that might be able to come open, and that was Jeff Driscoll,
yes,
Kyle Allen and Brandon Allen. Now, there's one UFA, there's one restricted free agent, and there's one extended rights free agent amongst those three. Driscoll obviously performed really well until he got hurt with Detroit, and we know what Detroit are like. But certainly he performed well in his time, and he's got much more starting experience to be able to go off his tape. Has a great arm, great athleticism, same as Sudfeld. Sudfeld slightly less athleticism, but he's able to show processing and got a decent arm. Brandon and Kyle Allen have got extensive starting experience in their relatively short tenure as quarterbacks in the NFL, and both have performed really, really well. Both, with the Panthers, doing particularly well there when Cam Newton was out for extended periods. And obviously you got so that's Brandon and Kyle Allen. Both have done really, really well with the opportunities they've had. But again, you're going to have to give something up to get those kind of guys. But that might be. It might be a piece, it might be a player. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be draft capital. And with them being restricted free agents, obviously you do get the opportunity to negotiate a contract, and you can work on sort of making it unreasonable for their current team to sort of take them on in that QB room in the first year. So you load up the contract with lots of money in the first year. You're not guaranteeing beyond that year. So you'd be paying like really high second string money, almost starter money. So you'd be looking at sort of around about the 8 to 10 million mark, possibly even more in that first year. But obviously over the length of the contract, that would be less guaranteed money. And then if it does bomb out, if they don't start, if we don't need them, you've got them then on a very attractive contract to trade away. Or alternatively, you've got someone who's a very low-cost option with the ability to cut bait at any time that's still on your roster as a backup QB if Mitch Trubisky has beaten them out. So it's kind of I see those three options as being a potential win-win. Obviously, Driscoll comes with the playbook from Detroit Lions, so that doesn't hurt us in any way, shape or form. So those are the three guys that I would look at, and sort of, along with that sort of Sudfield type option, those would be the three guys that I would potentially consider. And the Allens are both very good processors of coverage. They're both very able to get the ball out quickly, diagnose quickly, have done it with very good success. I think the Panthers' Allen, he threw for 4 touchdowns and 300 and something yards against the Packers. So that's always a plus to have in your toolbox.
Absolutely. For sure. Hey, before we get off the topic of quarterbacks who performed at the Combine and go to some other position areas, I wanted to get your take on Steven Montez, the quarterback out of Colorado. And I'll tell you why. Going into the 2019 college football season, I had my eye on Montez, and like other people did, that this was going to be a year he was going to take that leap forward. He's got the size, he's got the arm strength, and so unfortunately 2019 didn't yield the results. And in fact, a lot of people have kind of after the season was over, kind of ruled him out as a potential even draftee. Saw a lot of people talking about him as an undrafted free agent, which I don't think is going to happen. I think he will definitely be chosen in the draft. But at the Combine, some of the talk that I heard was that he really helped himself and that he looked great in the drills. And I saw him in some of those drills, and the ball just jumped off his hand. He's got some great velocity with his throws. And so wanted to get your scouting evaluation on what you've seen so far out of Steven Montez.
So in terms of his tape, again, underwhelming. He's a guy where I was sort of watching his tape. I think, is it Colorado? He's got Laviska Shenault.
Correct.
As his guy. And obviously an outstanding talent at wide receiver in the conference that he was in, making contested catches, mind you. You talked about his velocity and his arm strength and things like that. That's in a dome in sort of 75-degree conditions. Didn't see that on the tape at Colorado, where obviously it was a lot colder, probably more similar to the conditions that he's going to see more often than not in Chicago. That didn't really show up on the tape for me. I'm happy to be proven wrong on all of these guys. I would love to be proven wrong. Just didn't see it. I didn't see necessarily someone who looks beyond Laviska Shenault as being an option to throw the ball to, other than checkdowns to running backs. Didn't see him necessarily spreading the ball out or deceiving people with his eyes. Didn't necessarily see him being able to process 1, 2, 3 reads, go back to a second window on a first read. I didn't see any of that sophistication at QB. So, again, underdeveloped, which is why he's sort of a later round guy. Certainly size, physicality, has those sort of sides of tools. But for me, underwhelming tape and just... I don't know whether it's hand size or whether it's difficulty gripping the ball in the cold or what the issue is, but there seems to be something there in terms of him being able to throw the ball in cold conditions that I just didn't see it at Colorado that much at all. So he's someone who I sort of see as being a late round stroke, if you want to take a flyer, or undrafted free agent. Was by far and away, other than Shea Patterson, who isn't draftable at all in my opinion, possibly the worst QB at the Senior Bowl. 9 3/8 inch hands. So out of El Paso, Texas.
Bigger than Joe Burrow's hands. That was a big time.
Yeah, bigger than Joe Burrow's hands, but Joe Burrow's hands seem to be able to get it to his receivers a little bit better.
Yeah, indeed. Hey, lots of debate going on in the chat room regarding Jake Fromm. Ramey does not like him, and Swanky is a big fan of Jake Fromm and says don't count him out. I'm looking at a recent report from Brian Perez over at NBC Sports sports.com. Our friend Brian says that, Jake's poor NFL combine could actually help the Bears, meaning that he's going to drop in the draft. And so maybe you pick a guy like Fromm in the 4th or 5th round as a developmental player. Tell the folks in the chat room why you prefer a Jake Fromm over, say, a Jalen Hurts.
So we talk about elevating a program as a QB. Jake Fromm has got a lot of receivers drafted in the 1st round, and that's as much about him. I mean, you look at the quality of the people that have come out of the wide receiving positions that have left over the years that Jake Fromm has been a quarterback. He's been starter since day one. There are 3 other quarterbacks in this draft, I believe, who were, and one that's going to be coming out next year, who's currently the Ohio State QB, who all tried to beat Jake Fromm out and didn't. That's not without him being able to process and run the offense and be a good leader and do everything you need to see out of a quarterback. If you watch, I think it's QB1 program, I think it's available on Amazon, you'll see what he was like as a kid, just really grown up, really professional in his approach. He's just incredibly impressive as a young man in terms of professionalism and his ability, but he's now battle tested as well. His offensive line last year at Georgia was one of the worst. Yeah, I know there's some 1st round picks there, but they had difficulties last year because there were more sort of 4 and 5 wide receiver routes. There were less sort of tight end staying in the formation last year at Georgia because obviously there was a change, I believe, in offensive coordinator, and as a result, they were just basically blitzing against him playing man because his wide receiver talent last year wasn't as good as it was the previous 3 years, and that's why you saw some struggling from Jake Fromm last year. Watch his tape from the previous years where he's got people like Javon Wims, like Riley Ridley, all of the various different receivers that have come out of Georgia, and you'll see him not only sort of getting it to those guys, but if you watch the full game tape, you'll see him spreading the ball about, you'll see him manipulating defenders with his eyes, you'll see him making quick reads and getting the ball out quick when it's going to be a quick win, you'll see him waiting longer for plays and throwing back shoulder balls, putting it into positions where it's easy for his receiver to catch it, ball placement being absolutely spot on, throwing it low and away if there's inside leverage from a DB, so low and to the outside. He just puts the ball where it's catchable, and that's what you really want from a QB. Do we necessarily need him to run 4-5? Well, it'd be nice if he did run 4-5, but if he's able to manage the offense and to make quick reads and process coverages correctly and getting it to the right guys, that's infinitely more attractive to me than someone who can run 4-5 and hasn't got a clue about processing. Not a knock on Jalen Hurts, by the way, there, Aldo. Although there is a little bit of that. So I couldn't help it, Jalen. I know you love Jalen Hurts. You're number one of his fan club. It's the new Quentin Nelson.
I am a fan of Hurts and Anthony Gordon. I'd love to see either one of those guys with the Chicago Bears. But please go ahead.
Do you know what, Aldo? I'll stop doubting you when it comes to QB when you get in Pat Mahomes right. So I'm just going to say listen to Aldo when it comes to QBs. So props to you. No, I mean that's basically how I see the guys. Is the only other guy that sort of I've actually got him higher at the moment. I'm thinking about moving him down, Jacob Eason, but that's just purely seduction over the arm talent.
Right.
A comparison for him is Jay Cutler for me. He doesn't throw anything until he sees it open. He stares people down, but by Christ, can he throw the ball quick? He's got an absolute rocket for an arm. So, again, he was another guy who Jake Fromm beat out. So that's why, do you take Jake Fromm? Do you take Jacob Eason? Well, that depends upon what your scheme is. But for us, we're running sort of an advanced spread West Coast kind of variation. That's where you take someone who's a good processor of information and who can run if you need them to, but they don't necessarily need to be a running back with the ball. They need to have the threat to run. And, Jake Fromm's got that. He is able to run with the ball. He's just not going to be, a 40, 50-yard guy that some of the other guys in the draft will be. But in terms of processing and running what we need him to do in the offense that we have, yeah, he ticks all the boxes for me.
Okay. Let's now move our attention to some other players at the Combine who you were impressed with and may have moved up on your draft board, which, again, people can find Bearlissimo's draft board at thedraftnetwork.com. Just type in Bearlissimo, and you should be able to find it there. And we'll provide a link on Twitter and our Facebook social media accounts. Players who at the Combine impressed and may have positively impacted your draft board.
Well, there were a couple of guys that kind of confirmed what I thought they were, and a couple of guys who ran better than I thought they would. So, for example, running backs, you're looking at Joshua Kelly, 4.49, showed the pace that we saw at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
Jonathan Taylor, just absolutely outstanding all the way through the Combine. Just a fantastic specimen at running back. Jermichael Hasty actually ran a lot better than I thought he would. He ran low 4.5s, so he ran 4.55. He is really shifty. I've already talked about him being a later round guy. Antonio Gibson, the wide receiver running back. If I've tweeted it out, actually, if you look at MathBomb and you look at you search MathBomb Antonio Gibson, you'll see that he's put out both as a running back and a wide receiver, his stats and metrics, which is what we saw in terms of his tape in his last year at Memphis. And he was in the high 9s. That's the elite range as both a running back and wide receiver. Watch his tape at the Senior Bowl. Watch his tape against SMU. Tell me that that's not a player that you want to have. There were some guys, defensive backs, linebackers, that really surprised me. The edge and defensive lineman was a little bit underwhelming in terms of their performances. No one really sort of stood out as being exceptional in those positions for me. Defensive backs were some of the guys that were sort of surprising, guys who had kind of ruled out on tape. The one linebacker I'll come back to was Willie Gay Jr. in Mississippi State.
Right.
When I was looking at the tape of him, he was one of these guys that I talked about all day where I kind of ruled him out because he looked a little bit like a headless chicken for me. So he had the athleticism. He looked quick, but what for me, he was running up blind alleys. He was struggling to get away from blocks. He was struggling to work through trash. In terms of diagnosing, he just looked like an underdeveloped linebacker. Well, with his athleticism being the way it is, he's a guy you're going to have to look at again, I think. The two Clemson DBs and linebackers, all of them ran really, really well. So that's another case of some of the safeties that have got there with the lower end of their safeties. I'm trying to think of his name. I'm just trying to find him again on here. But he ran in the 4.4s. Tanner Muse. So he wasn't a safety who necessarily started at Clemson, but he's someone I'm going to have to go and look at sort of full tape because he ran a 4.41, 220 pounds. So he's a more of a thumper, and running at that sort of speed, he's someone I'm going to have to look at again. Javelin Guidry out of Utah. Any of the Utah defensive backs, you're going to have a decent player on your hands. Javelin Guidry was a guy who played some nickelback, he played some safety. They actually played him in the box quite a lot, which was a little bit surprising because he's sort of under 5'11", about 180 pounds. So not particularly a very physical specimen, but in terms of running, he ran a 4.29 at the Combine and was an excellent performer in all of the drills the defensive backs did. A guy who we've spoken to at Senior Bowl all day, and we've been talking about since episode 2, Kindle Vildor. He had an absolutely fantastic performance at Combine. Jeremy Chin, fantastic performance at Combine. Yeah. Again, Southern Illinois tape is not particularly easy to get hold of. So I'm going to have to try and find more of it. But those were the guys who sort of really stood out for me. Those are the most outstanding guys that I saw, certainly, in terms of their performance. Made me want to have another look at their tape. And they're probably going to move up off the back of it.
You mentioned Willie Gay Jr., and that's another example of the importance of these interviews with players because he was actually suspended for a while, so he had some off-the-field issues. I'm not quite sure what the entire story is with that, but you of course you want to draft guys who come in with high character and so forth, and a lot of times these problems that lead to suspensions are misunderstandings and are forgivable offenses, but that's a guy who whatever he does on tape and whatever he does at the combine, you want to make sure you're drafting a guy who's just going to stay out of trouble and so forth. So Willie Gay Jr. will try to get more information on what his issues are and share that with our audience here.
Sure thing. I'll take a look at that. And we can't really talk about the combine without talking about, again, another one of my favourites, Aldo, and that's Denzel Mims.
Oh, yes.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, you're
yeah, I mean, how long have we been talking about him? It just seems like an inordinate amount of time. And with good reason, because everything I saw on the tape in terms of his just out and out speed, at the size that he is as well, and the length that he is. Just absolutely outstanding, mind-boggling numbers at every single drill that he ran. Just going to pull up his stats now if I can do it. Just getting him up.
Yeah, and I'm looking at your big board here. You're probably going to move him up on your big board because I see that he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You got him at number 10 on your big board, just below Brendan Ayuk. KJ Hamler, he's at number 8. T. Higgins at number 7. Jalen Rigor from TCU at number 6. Justin Jefferson at number 5. Laviska Shenault from Colorado at number 4. Henry Ruggs. What speed
it's
times?
Just a ridiculous draft class for wide receiver. It's just, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, Denzel Mims, I mean, who can you realistically put him above there? I mean, because all of those guys that are above him are just absolute phenoms. Jerry Jeudy at the top of it, just absolutely outstanding. So, I mean, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs, Laviska Shenault, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Reagor, T. Higgins, KJ Hamler, Brandon Ayuk, Denzel Mims, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Van Jefferson, Colin Johnson, Michael Pittman Jr., KJ Hill, Tyler Johnson out of Minnesota, Devin DuVernay, Antonio Gandy-Golden. I've got Antonio Gibson in as a running back on my list, but he's equally a wide receiver that you'd be putting in and around that sort of Donovan Peoples-Jones. He'd be above that because he gives so much extra value. But Denzel Mims, I mean, there's going to be some of these guys that are above him are going to fall. At least one of them is going to fall. And if you can't get Denzel Mims, if you can get a Brandon Ayuk, a KJ Hamler, a T. Higgins, a Jalen Reagor, a Justin Jefferson, there's no way Justin Jefferson gets out in the first round for me. Laviska Shenault might, because he didn't run an outstanding time at the combine. But any one of those guys, even down to Van Jefferson, you're going to get an outstanding wide receiver who's going to be a deep threat. And I only see that as being a position of strength for the Bears. I mean, if we're going to go for one, do we want to overpay in free agency? Do we want to trade away? Bearing in mind how much wide receivers are when they're good to re-sign. Look at Amari Cooper's numbers. It's a position in the draft, that edge, tackle, those three. If you can pick up a good one in the draft, you're set in terms of your cap because you can prioritise it in less expensive positions in free agency just to top you up and tide you over. If you can make sure you can draft good quarterbacks, good tackles, good defensive ends, stroke edge guys, wide receivers and cornerbacks and safeties. I know that's a lot of positions, but if you can at least hit on some of those with your earlier picks, those are the more expensive. Defensive backs, not so much. Cornerbacks, yes. So the ones that cost you a lot of money, QB, tackle, edge, cornerback. Those are the ones that cost you the most money, and then closely followed by a cornerback with wide receiver. So those are positions I think the Bears, realistically, that's what we're going to be looking at with our 2-2s, our 4th round pick and into the 5th round. That's what we're going to have to sort of look at. And some of the other positions are going to, because there is some value there. There are some players that are going to fall. It's going to be a case of who falls, because that's going to change the priority when it comes to drafting. Obviously, what we do in free agency is going to affect that as well.
Got to get your thoughts on the numbers that Chase Claypool, the wide receiver out of Notre Dame, put up. He's one of my favorites. I know you've got him 192 overall on your list, and it's hard to argue. I mean, there's so much talent at that position, but do you have him that far down because you have concerns about him, or is it because there's just so much talent at the position?
There is so much talent. I'm probably being a little bit harsh to him. I think I'm probably going to move him up above Antonio Gandy-Golden, so 132. He's probably going to move up 60 spots, and it's just because of values at other positions that are putting down that far. What I saw at Notre Dame was a really good blocker on the edge, sort of Wims kind of level, if not better, almost Brandon Marshall-like ability to block on the edge. So he's able to do that. He ran a really fantastic time in the 40 at his size. I think the talk of him being a tight end is redundant at this point. He's good for it. The way I like him is obviously the Seattle wide receiver who was the t-shirt king of the draft last year that got his top off and performed really well last year. But he's just asked to run linear routes, so it's just a downfield. He's basically a deep threat. He runs skinny post corners and flies, and maybe a comeback. But he struggles on sort of anything outbreaking or anything that requires a bit more nuance in route running. He's going to struggle, and that's what Chase Claypool is for me. He's a guy that is going to be a deep threat. He's big enough to be able to out physical guys downfield. Get him running over, middle of the field, open type routes. So against cover 2, that sort of thing, cover 4, cover 2. Get him in the middle of the field. He's gonna be a problem for any safety. Get him 1-versus-1 with like a cover 3 look or a cover 0 on the outside. You're going to be able to throw it up and he's going to be able to get it, or he's just going to burn people on the outside. But if you want him to run in breaking routes, sharp cuts, if you want him to run timing routes, he's going to struggle in trash. He's going to struggle to get in and out of his breaks. That's where I saw him struggle on tape, and I didn't see anything really to dissuade me of that in the drills, was his ability to get in and out of breaks. He's a tall guy. He's very fast. He weighs higher than average, which means he's an outstanding athlete. That's more difficult. It's just simple physics. It's more difficult to get it to stop and then really re-accelerate again out of a break. So if you want him to run more sophisticated routes, as you tend to need to do in West Coast offense variants, he's going to struggle with that. But all of the downfield stuff, just send him deep and chuck it up.
Indeed,
because he's probably going to come down with the ball. Yeah, he's going to be great value.
Yes,
I think he's definitely going to move up above Antonio Gandy-Golden, I think, who again was very good at the combine. Antonio Gandy-Golden,
yes, he was
at his size.
Mm-hmm. Chase Claypool, the numbers officially from NFL.com: 6'4 1/4, weighs 238 pounds. His official 40-yard dash was 4.42, and the folks at NFL Research made the comparison to Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson, just slightly taller, a pound heavier, and just 0.2 of a second faster than Chase Claypool. I don't think he's going to put up Megatron type numbers in the NFL or be that type of talent, but that is a good comp in terms of size and speed. Chase Claypool is I think a guy you've got to pay attention to when somebody of that size runs a 4.42. Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, the athleticism definitely is there, but again, it's just getting in and out of those breaks. He doesn't get in and out of the breaks and get away from the line the same way that Calvin Johnson did. I mean, that guy was just an absolute freak of nature. It wasn't just his ability to sort of run fast and be big. He could sort of stop really quickly and get in and out of his breaks really quickly as well. So he was a much more sophisticated route runner than I think Chase Claypool is. But DK Metcalf, who you've rightly identified in the chat room, is the guy I was talking about at Seattle. He could definitely be every part that DK Metcalf is.
That wouldn't be bad.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying though. This is when we keep coming back to Matt Nagy and we keep coming back to the play calling up until this point. He hasn't put guys in a position to succeed with what they're good at. Mm-hmm. He's been running his offense. Now, if this year he's able to do that, if this year is the year that he says to all of his assistant coaches, okay, tell me what everyone can do, how are we going to incorporate that into the scheme, which players are we going to throw out, which ones are we going to put in, what are we going to run, what variants can we run off the back of that, and look at it that way in terms of his play calling, then we've got a chance of this season being an outstanding one no matter who they draft. But if you keep drafting guys or having guys on your roster and you ask them to do something that they can't do, they're going to fail. So it's going to come down to coaching, I'm afraid. I mean, Ryan Pace can do his job. I mean, he's not done great in the first or second rounds largely in his time at the Bears, but where we've got most of our picks, which is sort of round 4 to round 7, he's done pretty well there. So that with the sort of the depth of the wide out, running back, tight end, some of those positions, lesser so at quarterback, I feel. Like I say, I think there's going to be a ridiculous amount of quarterbacks going the first and second round this year. And I'm not sure whether the guys who are still going to be on the board in the second round are going to be worth taking there, or whether we can look at, moving back or getting out of that spot in the second round and picking up some extra picks, later on and use those to maybe move up and package to get a third round back and get a QB at something, that third, fourth round range.
I want to conclude by just talking a little bit more about Matt Nagy. You brought up the topic, and I think, it's everyone knows that Mitchell Trubisky is never going to reach the potential that he has as a quarterback, and what that potential is the jury is still out, although more and more people are questioning that potential. At least that's what the narrative is out there. But everyone knows that he's never going to meet whatever that potential is if Matt Nagy, his head coach, and the guy responsible for this offense does not alter what he is doing with this offense to suit Mitchell Trubisky's positives and his strengths. So I want you to talk a little bit more about that as we conclude this episode of Bearlissimo. What do you hope to see this head coach accomplish with this quarterback so that he can, because let's face it, if Mitchell Trubisky doesn't live up to expectations, that can really retard the ability of this team to become a sustainable franchise in the playoffs for years. I mean, this could really set back this team. So this dynamic between Nagy and Trubisky is so important. They've got to get this right or get really, really lucky with a free agent acquisition at that quarterback position or a developmental quarterback who could, progress quickly and become the starter. Your thoughts?
So this is such a nuanced conversation to have.
Yes.
It really is going to need an episode of its own to discuss it really and do it justice. And the reason why I say that is because someone like Chris Black might call me a truther on ESPN 1000 because I say that Mitch can do it. Other people might say, "Oh, he's never going to do it. He's rubbish," and all the rest of it. Which, if you look at Twitter, that's the prevailing wind. But what people don't seem to realise is let's look at season 1 and season 2 under Matt Nagy. Let's ignore the Oompa Loompa years, offensive coordinator Dale Loggins, and let's look at years 1 and 2 with Nagy. What was the difference between the coaching and the offensive output and production between year 1 and year 2? All of the coaches were the same. What was the difference? We had 12 variations on offensive line versus a consistent offensive line the year previous in the main. There were sort of 2 or 3 changes, I believe, in the previous year to that. That was the difference between the offense being able to run in a functional way and to be able to stay on the field and put points on the board early for our defense to be able to make hay. Our defense didn't make as much hay. There was a scheme change in terms of the coaching, that side of the ball. Our offensive line had 12 variations in 16 games. Our head coach didn't make any allowance or change for that. That's where the struggles with this offense were last year. He wanted to expand the playbook because he said at the preseason he was going to expand the playbook. And that's why he did it. What he should have done was look at what he had on the offensive line. We had an undrafted free agent defensive tackle who practiced exclusively, as you would have heard if you'd listened to Bears Bar Room, at right tackle in all of the off-season and all of the preseason. He was playing at right guard. We had a swing tackle who was on the Detroit Lions and couldn't start there. Has never been a starting tackle. He's more of a left-sided tackle than he is a right tackle. He was playing right tackle when Massey went out with vertigo, stroke, concussion, stroke, whatever it was that was aiding him. We didn't make any changes. We didn't make any variations. So what kind of things help an offensive line in flux and a QB who's behind that offensive line? Get the run game going. How do you get the run game going? We put more bigger bodies on the field and we run the ball behind those bigger bodies. So what happens when we put 2 tight ends and JP Holtz as a fullback on the field and we run with power straight up the middle. Oh, look, we get 6 yards a clip. Do we stick with that? No, we don't. We go away from it. We run 3rd and 2 shotgun. Wham blocks from JP Holtz that he didn't execute a single one all year. You got Leno being a revolving door at left tackle. You've got Coward falling over at right guard because he's trying too hard and playing without balance. You've got a guy who can't bend or dip at right tackle, who struggled certainly late on, and obviously 2 guys on injured reserve on the offensive line, plus a change at centre and guard. And we didn't make any changes or allowance to that. So when we talk about Mitch Trubisky, let's not ignore the fact that he was playing behind that. How does that affect him? No running game means what to play action? No one's going to bite on it. So on downs 1 and 2, where it's 1st and 10, 2nd and 9 or 8, because you can't run the ball, you're going to have guys dropping out of the box. You're going to have 7 on the line of scrimmage in the defense in the box. They're going to show you, say, dare to run against us, dare to run against us. We didn't, because Nagy wouldn't do it. And they knew that then on 3rd down, when it was 3rd and long, they could drop 8 people into coverage. Where's Mitch going to go? Where is he going to go? They're still showing 7 at the line. So we're going to be calling coverages, and we did. Have a look at the tape. We called protections with sort of 7 and 8 man protection, meaning 2 or 3 at best, more often than not 2, on routes, one of which would be the designed receiver. And they'd be dropping 8 people into coverage against that. And we would have 7 or 8 people left back at the line of scrimmage protecting against 3 or 4 rushers. And still they were getting beaten because the offensive line was in such flux. It was just the worst example of year 1 to year 2 as a coach. There was a massive regression in coaching. It was Nagy. It was his play calling, I'm afraid. Because what he should have done was, as a coach, he should have been saying, okay, what can this line run? What can we do to get the run game going? We get the run game going, Mitch will take care of himself. He can run the speed option, he can run the RPO. We can then legit pass, off play action. Mitch is really good at play action. That's what we should have done. But did we do any of that? We didn't do any of that. So what needs to happen this year for Mitch to succeed? We need the offensive line to be a consistent unit and to play together and to rep against every single front in the off-season. They need to work as much of the off-season as they possibly can as a unit. Okay? Once we've got that going and we're getting the run going and all that sort of side of thing takes care of itself, you will see a better quarterback, whether it's Mitch or anybody else behind the centre. You will see a better quarterback when the run game is going. You can only get the run game going with a consistent offensive line, knowing what they're doing against every front and executing it effectively. And until we see that, nothing is going to change, Aldo. As positive as I am about the Bears, I love the Bears, and I was positive about Nagy in the first year. He didn't adapt when things changed in second year. That's what he needs to do this off-season. I did hear some of it in terms of his speech in the pre-season, the combine that we did last week, the interviews there. I heard some of it. I've got to see it. That's the difference.
Well, I think you stepped up in the pocket and delivered a 50-yard bomb down the sideline. That is what everybody in the chat room is saying. They love your analysis of Matt Nagy. And it's clear that you're not excusing Mitchell Trubisky's performance and some of the mistakes, but you have centered, the problems right at the shoulders of where I think they belong to the most, and that is the head coach who just failed to adjust accordingly and failed to play to the strengths of his roster. You said it much more eloquently than I did, but that's just really, really well done there, Mr. George Bayliss.
Thank you, Mr. Aldo Gandhi. It's like it's been talked about since the Grecian times. Okay, so the ancient Greek philosophers. If you repeat the same thing when you're trying to teach someone something, and the child fails, or in this case, the player fails, who is the person that's not learning? It's the teacher, not the student. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to do.
Very well put. This will conclude our episode of Bearlissimo for Tuesday, March 3rd. And I got to tell you that Duke in the chat room said that this topic just deserves its own show. Just like you said, this conversation regarding Nagy and Trubisky is the highlight of what needs to be addressed this offseason. And so let's devote more time on next week's show on March 10th when we're back here on Mixlr.com live, and the podcast available an hour or so after we're done live. And also get ready for Free Agency Frenzy, which will start on March 15th, and we will be talking about that and a lot more on the next episode of Bearlissimo. George, it is all yours. Say goodbye to your fans.
So thank you for everyone for listening in, and I encourage you to listen in later on tonight and this week. Shy fans in the stands are going to kill it as they normally do. Draft on Tap to have James Morgan out, Florida International, a possible QB that might be up for the Bears, so listen to that. And of course, 100 Proof is going to absolutely kill it. So stay tuned to the network. Keep being Bears fans, keep being Bahrain fans, and I can't wait to engage you on Twitter. Let's get this, boys and girls.